The HOA kept calling the parking adjustment temporary, but by the third morning, I was already leaving for work 40 minutes early just to get my car out without scraping the fence. The new chain-link divider cut across the corner of my assigned spot at an angle that technically still left enough room for a vehicle if you backed in perfectly. Most people stopped trying after the first day. By Thursday, residents were parking halfway onto the curb instead of dealing with it, and somebody had started leaving orange traffic cones beside the tighter spaces like that solved anything. I asked one of the contractors whether they were planning to move the fence farther back once construction finished. He looked confused for a second before saying, "I thought this was the final position." That was the first time I went back to read the HOA notices carefully. The original email said access to resident parking would remain unaffected during the improvement project. But the updated parking diagram in the resident portal showed 3 spaces resized sometime after midnight. Mine was one of them. And the measurements beside my unit didn't match the copy attached to my lease anymore. The first fuel truck got stopped at the gate a little after 7 in the morning. I was down at Dock 3 checking a damaged cleat from the weekend rentals when Luis from Bayline Fuel called me instead of pulling through like usual. "You got a security issue up there?" he asked. I looked up toward the service road. From the marina, you could only see the top of the temporary gate arm through the trees, but that gate hadn't existed on Monday. "What security issue?" "They're saying we need HOA approval now." I wiped my hands on a rack and started walking uphill toward the access lane. Halfway there, I passed one of the maintenance carts parked beside the pump shed. Somebody had already taped a laminated notice to the windshield. Community-controlled service access. Authorized commercial vehicles only, no logo, no county seal. Just the HOA letterhead at the bottom. Luis's truck was sitting outside the barrier with the engine still running. Behind him, another delivery van had pulled off onto the shoulder to wait. The driver was smoking beside the road with both rear doors open. A security guard I'd never seen before stood beside the keypad post holding a clipboard. He looked relieved when I walked up, like he thought I worked there. "Morning," he said. "You with Bayline number." He glanced at the clipboard again. "Residents only beyond this point unless approved through the association office. I own the Marina Lane." He gave a quick nod that didn't really mean anything. "Okay, they told us commercial traffic has to be locked now." Luis leaned out his window. "I've got another stop after this, Ethan." I checked the sign again. Somebody had already scratched the word "controlled" with a key. "When did this go up?" The guard shrugged. "Yesterday afternoon, I think." A golf cart rolled slowly past on the neighborhood side of the barrier. 2 women I recognized from the South Docks glanced over for half a second before continuing up toward the clubhouse. One of them gave me a small smile that looked more automatic than friendly. I asked the guard who hired him. "Association Management, Janice Mercer." "I just work for the security company." He wasn't rude about it. That was the strange part. Everybody sounded like they were discussing a landscaping change. Luis finally killed the engine. "I can unload later if you want." "No," I said. "Hang on." I called the HOA office while standing beside the barrier. It went to voicemail twice before someone transferred me to Janice. Her voice came through cheerful and distracted, like I'd interrupted another task. "We're implementing temporary traffic management before storm season," she said. "You stopped fuel deliveries. Only until vendors are properly registered. This road services the marina and the community," she replied, "which is exactly why we need better oversight." I looked down at the fresh concrete anchors around the gatepost. Somebody had spent money on this. When was this approved? It was discussed at the infrastructure committee meeting. I wasn't at that meeting. There was a short pause. "Well," she said carefully, "the marina isn't technically part of the HOA." Behind me, Luis climbed down from the truck and started checking straps on the fuel hoses like he was trying not to listen. I watched another resident vehicle pass through the gate without stopping. "So commercial access goes through your office now?" "For now, yes. We've had complaints about what increased traffic, safety concerns, noise. You know how people are. That part bothered me more than the gate. Not the complaints themselves. The way she said people like the marina somehow existed outside the neighborhood, even though half the residents kept boats there. I asked how long the restriction would last. "We'll review things after registration procedures are finalized." What registration procedures? We're still organizing them. A maintenance skiff bumped lightly against the dock below us. Somewhere farther down the shoreline, somebody was testing a generator ahead of the weekend storm advisory. Janice lowered her voice slightly. "This really doesn't need to become confrontational, Ethan." The line clicked dead before I answered. Luis looked at me from beside the truck. "You want me to back out?" I checked the time on my phone, then took a picture of the sign the barrier arm and the temporary permit forms clipped to the guard's board. The permit sheet listed the road as Community Service Access Route 14. I'd never heard that name before. By the time the guard finally lifted the barrier for the fuel truck, Bayline had already canceled the afternoon seafood delivery window for the restaurant at Dock 2. Luis showed me the dispatch message before he drove down towards the marina. "Sorry," he said. "They moved your slot." I stood there a little longer after the truck passed through. The new gate motor kept making a low clicking sound every few seconds, even when it wasn't moving. The HOA email went out the next morning at 8:12. I saw it because one of the charter captains forwarded it to me with the subject line, "You seeing this?" The message came from Janice Mercer under the heading, "Community Infrastructure Update." Most of it was written in the same careful tone people use when they're trying to sound reasonable before creating a problem for someone else. Temporary Commercial Traffic Oversight Service. Access Compliance Storm Season Safety Management. The Marina Lane got referred to 3 different ways in 2 paragraphs. By the second page, they were calling it Community-Controlled Lane Access. I printed the email in the dock office and set it beside the old maintenance invoices from my mother's company. Half the invoices listed road grading and drainage work along the same lane the HOA now claimed was community managed. None of them used the HOA's road name. Outside, somebody was pressure washing a pontoon boat 2 slips over. The sound kept cutting in and out while I flipped through folders. Around 10, Bayline called again. "Not Luis this time. Dispatch. We need updated authorization paperwork before future deliveries." From WHO Association office, apparently. It's a private service lane. There was a pause while the dispatcher clicked through something on his computer. Look, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you what got flagged. I wrote down the time, his name, and the exact wording on the back of the HOA email. Then I drove up to the clubhouse. The parking lot was fuller than usual because people were getting boats ready before the weekend storm system moved inland. Golf carts lined the curb beside the tennis courts. Somebody had stacked sandbags outside the maintenance shed already. Inside the lobby smelled like coffee and fresh paint. Janice was standing near the reception desk, talking to a landscaping contractor. She smiled when she saw me, but it had the same energy as somebody noticing a delivery arrived early. Ethan, she said, I was actually going to call you later. You already sent the email. We needed to move quickly. You changed the name of the lane. It's a service designation. For what? Traffic management. The landscaping contractor started studying a clipboard like he wanted to disappear. I laid the printed email on the counter. You're telling vendors they need HOA authorization now. Temporary authorization. You don't authorize marina access. Janice kept her voice low, calm enough that anybody walking by would assume this was a scheduling issue. The board's concern is liability exposure for deliveries for unmanaged commercial traffic entering residential property. I looked through the lobby windows toward the road leading downhill to the docks. Two residents walked past carrying folding chairs toward the marina lawn where the weekend cookout was supposed to happen. Neither looked inside. You've never managed the lane before, I said. We've coordinated maintenance for years. That's not the same thing. Well, she said, adjusting a folder under her arm. People see it as part of the community now. That sentence stayed with me longer than the rest. Not because it sounded threatening, because she probably believed it. The landscaping contractor finally stepped away toward the hallway. Janice watched him leave before speaking again. You know how residents get when traffic increases. Traffic increased because the marina expanded rentals after the storm damage 2 years ago. And now we're trying to make operations safer. The word operations made the whole thing sound bigger than it actually was. I asked who approved the gate installation. The infrastructure committee. Who's on it, residents? That's not an answer. Her expression tightened for the first time. You're acting like this is personal. A golf cart alarm chirped outside. Somebody laughed in the parking lot. I realized people were moving around the clubhouse normally, while we stood there arguing over whether my own access road belonged to me. Janice slid the email back across the counter. If you submit vendor schedules in advance, this should stay simple. I folded the paper once and stuck it into the maintenance binder under my arm. On the drive back down to the marina, I stopped beside the drainage culvert halfway along the lane. There was still faded blue paint on the concrete from the repair work my mother's crew did after the flooding back in 2008. I remembered holding flashlights for the welders because the power had been out across the shoreline that week. At the bottom of the culvert, somebody had zip-tied another temporary HOA sign onto the fence overnight. Authorized access subject to community review. One of the corners was already peeling loose in the humidity. Back at the docks, Darnell from Harbor Electric was waiting beside his van. He rubbed the back of his neck before speaking. They told us future contractors need HOA clearance too. I unlocked the fuel shed and handed him the maintenance key ring. You working today or not? Yeah, he said quickly. I'm just trying not to get caught in the middle of whatever this is. Neither of us said anything after that. The radio on the dock office desk kept repeating the same storm advisory every 20 minutes while I updated next week's fuel schedule by hand. The storm warning moved from tropical advisory to coastal watch by Thursday afternoon. That changed the marina schedule before it changed the weather. By noon, I had 3 charter cancellations, 2 requests for emergency fuel reserves, and a voicemail from Harbor Ice asking whether the HOA checkpoint was still delaying vendor traffic. I spent most of the morning moving equipment farther inland from the south docks. The wind hadn't picked up yet, but the air had that heavy stillness that usually showed up 12 hours before shoreline storms. Halfway through securing the rental skiffs, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an automated email from the HOA. Updated temporary access procedures. All commercial vehicles subject to advance approval. A second attachment listed approved delivery windows. Fuel deliveries had been moved to 6 to 8 in the morning only. The problem was the fuel supplier trucks came from 2 counties over. They didn't even reach the marina that early, unless dispatch shifted the whole route. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Bayline. 5 minutes later, Luis called me laughing softly into the phone. Man, they're trying to schedule marina fuel like Amazon packages. You making tomorrow's run or not? Dispatch says maybe. Depends whether your neighborhood committee approves us in time. He sounded amused but tired. Behind me, somebody dropped a toolbox onto the dock hard enough to rattle the cleats. I spent another hour reorganizing storm inventory because 2 delivery windows got pushed into Friday afternoon. By then, the Weather Service expected outer rain bands to already be hitting the shoreline. The whole thing would have been annoying, without becoming serious if the HOA had stopped there. Instead, around 3 o'clock, Janice sent another notice. All contractors entering the Marina District now require temporary registration badges issued through the clubhouse office. The electrician working on Dock 5 packed his equipment 10 minutes later. Come on, I told him. You've worked here for 6 years. Yeah, and I'd like to work here 6 more. He loaded extension cords into the van without looking at me. They said they're tracking liability now. The word liability was everywhere suddenly. Liability, oversight, community coordination. Nobody said ownership anymore. The maintenance radios kept buzzing while I walked the shoreline checking tie-downs. One of the rental managers stopped me near the bait freezer and asked if the marina would stay open through the weekend. Why wouldn't it? She hesitated. People are saying the bore might shut to access during the storm. Who's saying that I don't know? Around. That was the first moment the whole thing started feeling unstable outside paperwork. Not bigger exactly, just harder to contain. By late afternoon, the checkpoint at the top of the lane had backed traffic almost onto Harbor Route 6. A landscaping trailer sat angled halfway into the shoulder, while security checked permit lists against printed spreadsheets clipped to a folding table. Residents in golf carts started bypassing the line through the bicycle path beside the drainage ditch. Nobody looked angry yet. Mostly irritated. The kind of irritation people get right before they start blaming each other. I parked beside the maintenance shed and called County Public Works again. After 15 minutes on hold, somebody transferred me to Shoreline Access Management. The woman there sounded exhausted before I finished explaining. "We don't regulate private HOA checkpoints," she said. "It's the only commercial lane servicing the marina. Then it depends on the recorded access structure." "What recorded structure?" "That's a property records issue. Who handles that? Potentially county planning. Or harbor operations. Maybe easement review. Maybe a pause." "We've had a few calls already," she admitted. That bothered me more than if she'd said no. It meant the situation had already spread far enough that multiple people were asking questions nobody could answer clearly. I wrote down her department name on the back of an old fuel receipt and drove up toward the checkpoint again before sunset. The temporary gate arm was stuck halfway open this time. A delivery van from Harbor Catering sat idling beside the curb, while two residents argued quietly with a security guard about ice deliveries for the weekend cookout. Farther uphill, somebody was dragging patio furniture inside before the rain started. Janice stood near the folding table, holding a stack of permit forms against her chest to keep them from blowing away in the wind. She saw me pull over, but didn't walk toward the truck. One of the residents noticed me instead. "Hey," he called out, "if fuel's getting delivered tomorrow or not." Not angry, just nervous. I looked past him toward the marina below the hill. Half the shoreline lights were already on, even though the sun hadn't gone down yet. "I'm trying to figure that out now," I said. The resident nodded slowly, like that answer wasn't reassuring enough, but also wasn't my fault. Janice finally crossed the road toward me. "The board's trying to keep things organized," she said quietly. A gust of wind blew two permit sheets loose from the stack in her arms. One landed against my tire. Across the top, above the permit number, the form listed the road as Community Service Access Route 14. Under that, in smaller print, Operational Access Classification Pending. I picked the paper up before the rain started. The rain started just after midnight. By morning, the marina looked flattened into shades of gray. Wind pushed sheets of water sideways across the docks hard enough that the channel markers disappeared every few minutes behind the spray. I spent most of Friday moving between the fuel shed, the south slips, and the maintenance office with a flashlight tucked into my jacket pocket, even during daylight. The checkpoint uphill stayed active anyway. Every few hours, another contractor called asking whether they were still allowed through. Around 11, Harbor Ice got turned away completely because their temporary permit number hadn't been entered into the HOA spreadsheet correctly. By then, I'd stopped trying to argue with the people over the phone. I just wrote everything down. Delivery times, delays, names, which trucks got stalled, which ones got through. The storm bands kept interfering with the marina radios. Every transmission sounded clipped halfway apart. Sometime after lunch, I finally went into the old storage room behind the maintenance office, looking for shoreline drainage records from the flooding years. The room mostly held things nobody used anymore. Rusted sign brackets, broken dock lights, boxes of faded rental paperwork from before online booking systems took over. My mother kept records differently than I did. Everything got labeled by project instead of year. I found the first maintenance binder behind a stack of cracked emergency buoys. Shoreline access. North service inside were invoices from county dredging crews, culvert repair approvals, utility trench maps, and handwritten notes clipped together with rusted fasteners. Half the pages smelled like mildew. Outside, the rain hammered against the metal roof hard enough to blur the sound of the generators. I sat on the floor beside the filing cabinet, turning pages until I found the land reference. Not Community Service Access Route 14. North Service Lane Conditional Operational Easement. I read the line twice. Then, again, slower. The easement description referenced emergency shoreline access, fuel transport, drainage, maintenance, and utility servicing rights tied directly to marina operations. Not HOA management. Operational maintenance responsibility remained under Vail Harbor Services, my mother's company. I kept reading. Half the wording looked older than I was. Some pages had typed amendments taped over previous revisions. One county form referenced storm restoration work from 1998. But the same phrase kept appearing: conditional access continuation. Not permanent. Conditional. A maintenance truck rattled past outside while I sat there holding the binder open on my knee. For the first time all week, the situation stopped feeling like administrative overreach and started feeling structurally unstable. Not because I suddenly knew how to fix it, because I understood why nobody at the county offices would give me a straight answer. The arrangement had probably operated on habit for so long that everybody forgot the lane only existed through marina maintenance agreements. My phone buzzed against the concrete floor beside me. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered and got 3 seconds of wind noise before someone spoke quietly. "This is Carol Jensen from Bayside Court, one of the residents uphill from the tennis courts. I got your number from Darnell." "Okay." A pause. "I just wanted to ask whether emergency vehicles can still get through if the weather gets worse tonight." Not "are you okay?" Not "what's happening?" Emergency vehicles. I looked back down at the easement papers. "Yeah," I said. "Right now they can." She exhaled softly like she'd been holding her breath before hanging up. 10 minutes later, another resident texted asking whether fuel deliveries were delayed again. Then another asked if marina generators were still operational. Nobody mentioned the HOA. By late afternoon, the rain eased enough for me to drive uphill toward the checkpoint again. The folding permit table was gone now. So were most of the contractor vehicles. Only one security guard remained near the gate, standing under a canopy beside stacks of soaked paperwork boxes. The temporary signs had started peeling apart in the rain. Janice was there too, arguing quietly into her phone while trying to keep documents dry under her jacket. She looked tired for the first time all week. Not angry, just overwhelmed. When she noticed my truck, her expression changed slightly. More cautious than defensive. I parked near the drainage ditch and stepped out holding the maintenance binder under my arm. The wind flipped several loose pages before I caught them. One of them slid halfway across the wet pavement toward the checkpoint. The security guard bent down and picked it up before the rain soaked through the paper completely. He glanced at the heading automatically. Conditional operational easement. His eyes moved once toward the gate behind him before handing the page back to me. Janice stopped talking mid-sentence. For a second, nobody said anything over the sound of the rainwater running through the culvert beneath the road. Then Janice lowered the phone slowly away from her ear. "What exactly is that?" she asked. I looked past her toward the marina lights down near the shoreline. "They never gave you the old maintenance records." The wind shoved rain sideways across the road again before she answered. "No. County mediation got scheduled for Monday morning after the storm finally moved inland. By then, the shoreline looked exhausted. Branches covered parts of Harbor Route 6. Half the community trash bins had blown into the drainage canals, and the marina parking lot still smelled like diesel from the emergency generators running through the weekend. I got to the county administration building 20 minutes early because I wanted time to organize the maintenance binders before anybody started talking. The hearing room itself wasn't much bigger than a classroom. Fold-out tables, fluorescent lights, harbor district maps pinned unevenly along one wall. Someone had dragged in extra standing fans because the building AC still hadn't recovered after the storm outages. Janice arrived with 2 board members and a stack of printed HOA notices inside blue plastic folders. None of them looked particularly confident anymore, but they still moved like people expecting procedure to stabilize things. Residents started filtering in behind them slowly. Not as a group. Individually. A couple from Bayside Court sat near the back without speaking to anyone. Darnell from Harbor Electric leaned against the hallway wall outside the room, scrolling through his phone. One of the charter captains nodded at me once before sitting near the door. Nobody looked angry. Mostly tired. A county shoreline coordinator named Evelyn Brooks handled the meeting. She spent the first 10 minutes asking everyone to stop interrupting each other before anyone had actually interrupted yet. That probably told me how her week had gone. Janice spoke first. She framed the entire situation as temporary emergency oversight during increased seasonal traffic and storm preparation. Listening to her, you almost could have believed the HOA had been managing the lane for years officially instead of improvising procedures over 4 days. Evelyn asked whether the HOA possessed recorded operational authority over the marina access lane. Janice slid a folder across the table. "We have maintenance coordination records." Evelyn skimmed the first page for maybe 5 seconds. "These are landscape and invoices. There are additional documents." "Do you have recorded access authority?" Janice hesitated. "Not long. Just long enough that several people in the room stopped looking at their phones." I opened the first maintenance binder beside me and turned it toward Evelyn's. The pages were still slightly warped from the rain. "Operational easement agreements start around Section 4, I said. "Drainage maintenance references are attached after the 2008 restoration permits." Evelyn spent longer reading those than she did the HOA paperwork. The room stayed mostly quiet except for the standing fan rattling against the far wall. One of the board members finally leaned toward Janice and whispered something I couldn't hear. Evelyn looked up. "These agreements classify the lane as conditional operational access connected to marina servicing responsibilities. Nobody answered immediately. The HOA can't independently regulate commercial access without renegotiating the operational easement structure, she continued. At minimum, this requires formal county review. Janice straightened in her chair. We were trying to address safety concerns. I understand that, Evelyn said evenly. But creating checkpoint restrictions without verified operational authority creates liability complications of its own. There was that word again, liability. Except now nobody sounded comfortable saying it. One of the residents near the back raised his hand awkwardly. So what happens during emergencies? Evelyn turned toward him. Access remains operational under existing marina servicing authority unless the county orders otherwise. The resident nodded once and sat back down. No relief, just recalculation. Janice started flipping through papers faster now, trying to find something she thought would shift the conversation back under control. We coordinated maintenance for years, she said. The community has relied on the lane continuously. That doesn't automatically transfer operational authority, Evelyn replied. The room got quiet again after that. Not dramatic quiet, administrative quiet. The kind where people start realizing they misunderstood something important several days ago and now have to slowly adjust without admitting it directly. I kept my attention on the paperwork in front of me instead of looking at the residents. Some of them had started avoiding eye contact anyway. Evelyn eventually outlined temporary conditions while the county reviewed the easement structure formally. No independent HOA checkpoints. No contractor restrictions outside emergency closures approved through county coordination. Future maintenance responsibilities had to be documented through recorded agreements instead of informal practice. The entire thing sounded colder than the way the marina had operated before. More official. Safer maybe. Less trusting. As the meeting wrapped up, people filed out quietly into the hallway. No speeches. No apology. Just low conversations about generator fuel insurance claims and cleanup schedules. Janice stayed behind, collected papers from the table slowly, like she was trying to delay walking back outside. I packed the maintenance binders into a plastic storage crate. You could have brought those records forward earlier, she said, without looking up. The standing fan clicked sideways again beside the wall. You could have asked whether the lane belonged to you before putting up a gate. She finally looked at me then. Not angry this time, mostly embarrassed. Outside the county building, 2 residents stopped me near the parking lot to ask whether fuel deliveries were returning to normal this week. Behind them, somebody from the HOA maintenance crew was already removing temporary permit signs from the back of a pickup truck. I told the residents deliveries would continue once Bayline reset the routes. They thanked me carefully. Like people talking to someone they suddenly realized they depended on more than they thought. The checkpoint disappeared 3 days later. Not all at once. First, the folding table vanished. Then the temporary permit signs came down. By Friday morning, the security canopy was gone too, leaving only the fresh concrete anchors still bolted into the shoulder beside the lane. The gate arms stayed stacked behind the HOA maintenance shed for almost a week before somebody finally hauled it away. Nobody mentioned it while it was there. The marina settled back into routine slowly after that. Fuel deliveries resumed on regular schedules. Harbor Ice stopped calling ahead for approval numbers. Contractors started driving straight down toward the docks again without parking halfway up the hill to wait for instructions that no longer existed. Operationally, things worked. Emotionally, nothing felt the same. I noticed it mostly in small conversations. Residents who used to stop and lean against the dock rails now kept the interactions shorter. People still waved from golf carts, but more carefully than before, like they were uncertain what category I belonged in now. Owner, vendor, neighbor, problem. The county review stayed open through the rest of the month. Every few days, another email arrived requesting updated maintenance diagrams, shoreline utility maps, or operational servicing records from previous years. I answered most of them from the dock office between fuel invoices and storm repair estimates. The new agreement drafts eventually replaced almost all the old informal arrangements. Recorded maintenance obligations, documented emergency access coordination, scheduled utility servicing responsibilities. Everything clearer. Everything colder. One afternoon, Darnell stopped by while I was replacing corroded wiring inside the south fuel shed. He stood beside the open electrical cabinet holding 2 cups of gas station coffee. You hear Janice step down from infrastructure's committee stuff. No, she's still on the board, just not handling marina issues anymore. I tightened one of the terminal screws before answering, "Okay." Darnell watched me work another few seconds. She probably thought she was protecting the neighborhood. Maybe. The generator outside kicked on briefly during a voltage drop, rattling the metal walls hard enough to interrupt the conversation. Neither of us picked it back up afterward. By early October, the shoreline finally looked normal again. Tourists returned for fall charters. The restaurant at Dock 2 reopened its outdoor seating after repairing storm damage. Most of the temporary county signage disappeared from Harbor Road 6. But the lane changed. The new county markers listed the access road officially now. North Service Lane authorized operational access. No HOA branding anywhere. The sign looked cleaner than the old ones. Less familiar too. A few residents started acting friendlier again once everything stabilized. One couple from Bayside Court even brought over extra supplies after a wind advisory one weekend. But conversations kept stopping right before they became personal. People talked about fuel schedules, weather, dredging permits, boat traffic, not the gate, never the gate. Late one afternoon, I was replacing the old marina entrance sign near the bottom of the hill when Carol Jensen slowed her golf cart beside the shoulder. The same woman who'd called during the storm asking about emergency access. She looked at the new signpost for a moment before speaking. "Looks better than the old one." The original sign had warped after years of salt exposure. I'd sanded most of the paint off already. Needed replacing. She nodded once. I think people got carried away. I adjusted the mountain bracket without answering immediately. Up the hill, another fuel truck rolled through the lane. Uninterrupted. No checkpoint. No security table. Just normal traffic. Carol rested one hand against the steering wheel. "For what it's worth," she said carefully. A lot of residents didn't understand how the road worked. The new sign shifted slightly while I tightened the bolts. Neither did the board. She looked like she wanted to say something else after that, but changed her mind halfway through it. Anyway, she said starting the golf cart again, storm season's supposed to calm down after next week. Then she drove off toward the upper lots. I finished leveling the sign alone. By the time the sun started dropping behind the marina slips, the new lettering had already dried. The evening fuel delivery came through a few minutes later. The driver barely slowed down past the culvert. About 2 weeks after the county meeting, the HOA finally removed the last temporary checkpoint hardware from the upper lane. The concrete anchors stayed longer. One of the maintenance crews spray-painted orange circles around them while waiting for a removal permit. So for a while, the road looked like somebody had changed their mind halfway through construction. The revised county access agreement arrived by email on a Thursday morning. Operational Servicing Authority remained under Vail Harbor Services. Emergency coordination procedures had to be documented annually going forward. No one argued with that version. Residents started acting careful around me after that. Not unfriendly exactly, just more aware. People who used to wave from golf carts now slowed down to ask whether fuel schedules were back to normal, or if the dredging crews were still delayed from the storm backlog. Conversations kept drifting towards marina operations before ending early. A few board members stopped coming down to the docks entirely. Janice came by once near the fuel shed carrying a folder with revised maintenance signatures inside. She asked where the county wanted the updated servicing map sent. I told her the shoreline coordinator's office preferred digital copies now. That was most of the conversation. Before leaving, she looked up toward the lane for a second, like she expected the checkpoint to still be there. Then she handed me the folder without opening it again. Later that evening, I replaced one of the faded directional markers near the culvert while waiting for the last fuel truck to come through. The old bolt holes still didn't line up correctly.